Hello, and welcome to episode 16 of My Dog Will Eat My Face. In this episode, I wish to provide basically a generalized update of my health and honestly my decline as I'm facing it in recent days, or weeks I should say. There have been some minor changes, but it's been more or less a steady decline and leading to some changes in my health and my condition that I wish to share. This is obviously mainly for my friends and family who listen to this podcast, but also to anyone else, clearly, who might get some value out of learning such information from me. This sort of also reverts back to the original purpose of this podcast, to be honest, as well. That it's here to discuss what it's like to face your own decline and your own death, slowly but surely, as it is in my case. And to discuss what it's like physically and mentally. Now, with that being said, there's going to be an interesting segue, so to speak, from this health update. And that segue, believe it or not, is going to touch on the topic of the afterlife. Yes, you heard that correctly, my friends, the afterlife. Now, I'm pretty much a card-carrying atheist, so to speak. I don't think that the afterlife is going to be any different from how things were before your life. But that being said, I've had some interesting discussions with one of my social workers in hospice on this topic that I wanted to share a little bit of. And also I've had some very strange, to be blunt, experiences that I can't explain and are frankly kind of spooky to some respect. I mean, they haven't really scared me, strangely enough, but there's been some odd experiences in my life that I wanted to share. And the reason being is because if I don't share them here, it's just probably going to be lost forever. No one will know that these experiences happened to me, and it will just disappear with me once I pass. So that being said, I just wanted to make a record of those experiences for those willing to listen and interested to hear what those experiences might be. And again, they are actually with respect to the afterlife, believe it or not. I hope this doesn't actually lose me some punches in my atheist card. But I don't think it will. I really don't. But I also have to be totally honest and truthful with what these experiences are like and what I've gone through and what I've witnessed, and I plan to be just that honest and blunt here, like I always am. So, with that said, I will start here soon with discussing the general health updates that I've been facing from hospice and my overall physical well-being as I skid down this hill of my decline. So getting started here, and before I touch on the more peculiar topic of the afterlife of all things, I will provide here a generalized health update, as I said. First off, I came down with food poisoning, of all things, in this last week. It was pretty darn awful. It was just, unfortunately, bad luck. It's got nothing to do with my heart, or my heart condition, I should say. But it had more to deal with bad tacos. Which is unfortunate because I love tacos and street tacos, but I think I'm going to be laying off them for a while now because it was so terrible. The food poisoning was just oh gosh, abysmal. I can't even think of the proper horrific words to describe it. It was probably in the top three, at least, of my worst stomach issues in my life, or that being either food poisoning or a stomach flu or something. It was easily in the top three of that in my whole life. And it just goes to show that when you're dying of heart failure, you can still get other diseases or other illnesses. You're not immune, especially to things such as bad tacos that might poison you. So that unfortunately happened, and though it was not obviously caused or anything to do initially with my heart condition, it did actually have an impact. It did have an impact on my heart, because I could feel some AFib in my heart, and I could feel it obviously fluttering, doing strange heartbeats, and when it did that, I would get a little kind of lightheadedness and like a little flush feeling. It's hard to kind of describe, and a little pressure and some pain sometimes in my chest. So I could tell that just based off the severity of the symptoms that I went through, that it was causing my heart to get rather angry with me, unfortunately, which is something that I definitely do not need. But alas, it is what it is. There's nothing to be done about it, and it was just a bad case of food poisoning that wrecked me for a good 24 to 26 hours, I would say. And I'm still recovering slowly from it, because it was, again, so bad. But I'll spare my listeners the gruesome details of what that was like. I'm sure everyone here listening has had their own bouts with such bugs or poisoning before, and everyone can probably relate. So there's really no need to describe it. So that happened, unfortunately, in the last week. But as a result of that, I actually saw 2 or 3 hospice nurses because they came to look at me and called me and whatnot to review me because of my condition and my stomach bug. And when doing so, they also did their usual vitals and their usual analysis of my body and my progression with my heart failure and my other diseases. So, unfortunately, with that, at least 2 hospice nurses provided a consensus that I'm absolutely getting worse, and that I'm actually quickly deteriorating now. As it was, I would oftentimes get worse, but then I would plateau, so to speak, and be at kind of a steady level, a new norm, maybe a new normal, at a lower level in my health. And I would level out, though, for a period of time and be relatively stable. But with their review of my health when they saw me, and this is not just based on the stupid stomach flu, or stomach poisoning, I should say, but just broader symptoms from the heart failure showed that, yes, the symptoms are unfortunately deteriorating and getting worse. And that was based on my current O2 requirements, oxygen requirements, the edema I have in my body, and other factors as well. But as it is today, I'm actually on a whopping 18 liters of supplemental oxygen. And that barely gets my oxygen percentage just above 90%. Maybe 90%, maybe 91% is usually what I hit. For example, just last night alone, I took my pulse ox, and at rest, I was at 90% oxygen. And my heart rate was 120 beats per minute, again, at rest. Because the heart tries to compensate for the lack of oxygen and pushes itself harder to pump harder and to get the oxygen going in your body, so your heart rate, unfortunately, increases. which in the case of heart failure is not good because it's just weakening the heart further. And so that's just the reality of it. Now I'm on an oxygen concentrator. Actually, I'm on 2 oxygen concentrators stacked together because one is not enough. And the highest they could possibly provide is basically where I'm at. The highest level of oxygen that they can provide in these concentrators is where I'm currently at. And even emergency tanks like you see in hospitals and that you see maybe people walk around with. Like, I mean, I have emergency tanks that are like that, just typical oxygen tanks that I can huff on if I need to. But they max out at only 15 liters. So I'm already oxygen deprived if I just switch to a straight oxygen tank, how they're designed. So if it gets worse beyond this, I don't think there's much they can do other than put me in a hospital setting and possibly, unfortunately, a ventilator. And that's no way to live. So I'm terrified of that happening, to be honest, but it sort of is what it is. Hopefully it plateaus here for a while at this current level and I can maintain this before it declines further into a range that cannot be remedied at home. In addition to that, my lymph nodes are still swollen as they have been for months. And I mean the lymph nodes at like the base of the neck, just above the shoulders. They've been swollen, but they're slightly worse now. And when these were first noticed by my hospice team, they were actually worried it was lymphoma. But I never got a formal diagnosis because I couldn't see an oncologist. And the short version of that story is, for some stupid reason, the oncologist I tried to reach out to would not accept a hospice referral. They wanted something from a primary care doctor, which is kind of asinine because my primary care doctor right now is my hospice doctor. But that wasn't good enough for them. They wanted someone else to refer me to them, otherwise they would not see me. It couldn't just come from a hospice reference for some insane reason. So I gave up because honestly, if it is lymphoma, I'm probably not going to do anything about it anyway. If I'm already dying, I don't really want to go through chemo or cancer treatment of any other sort. So it's kind of stupid for me to really pursue knowing whether it is or is not lymphoma. But be that as it may, the lymph nodes are still and a little bit more swollen than they have been. So that was another observation they made. In addition to this, there are some other more embarrassing symptoms I'm just going to keep to myself. There's some gross things that happen, and as I said, really embarrassing things that happen once your body starts to shut down. You can imagine if you're having organs shutting down on you and not operating as they should, weird and gross things start to happen. And I'm going to spare my listeners the details with respect to that, and also to save myself, because apparently I still have some modesty left. But you can use your imagination as to what could happen once your body starts to decline and fall. What's interesting about this all is I was actually talking to someone the other day in the hospice team, and I revealed to them that since I've been in hospice, first my mom died, then I lost my job and all my benefits, and then my best friend for most of my adult life, my dog, died. And on top of that, I'm facing this huge physical decline. And she said back to me, how can somebody be expected to live like that? Those are her words, not mine. And I just thought, indeed, how? It's a fair question. But I guess I found a way so far. But The unfortunate reality is that I am declining, and there's just nothing that can be done at this point to stop it. So, with respect to the decline of one's body as you face heart failure, and in particular when you're facing a lack of oxygen occasionally, you have to consider that one of the most important organs in your body, the brain, is not special in that it itself can also be impacted by this decline, especially by the lack of oxygen when it occasionally really hits. And that, unfortunately, is a symptom that is absolutely a problem for me off and on. And I'm sure many listeners are going to say, oh, that explains a lot why he's such an idiot. But it's only occasional, I should say. Usually, as I said earlier, my oxygen rate is at least 90%, so the brain is not starved. But every once in a while, it does plummet. If I do something, if I have to do something where I have to take my oxygen off, such as change the cords or something, it can plummet very quickly to about 65 or even lower percent, which at that point is way beyond the cardiac arrest level, and also a level to where your brain itself is beginning to get starved for oxygen. So one side effect I've had from this, honestly, has been hallucinations. And don't let that scare you. In my case, I just occasionally hear classical music in kind of a far distance, and that's it. So I could just be sitting there and I might hear just, I don't know, far off in the distance, Vienna Brut playing, or something like that, or Chopin playing off in the distance. So that's not too bad or alarming, when all things are considered. Sometimes it's actually comforting because I enjoy classical music, and so my brain sometimes provides me with just audio clips just for my own enjoyment. That's how I see it. But there have been other events too where I plan to digress here a bit. And it's been the voices. Yes, you heard me correctly, the voices. Now, before my listeners here flip out and go, oh my God, he's also schizophrenic. Not that there's anything wrong with that. If you're medicated, let me explain. I'm not a schizophrenic. There have been 4 instances now where I've heard voices, male and female, call my name in my home, as clear as day, as if they're right there next to me, saying hi in my name sometimes, or saying my name and telling me to look. At what? I don't know. But they are as clear as day. It sounds like a person is standing right there. It's not distant, it's not muffled, it's not mumbled, it's not incoherent. It is clear as though a person were standing right there saying this to me. And in one case, I thought I heard my ex actually cry for my name in distress from my front door, which is not impossible because my ex has access to the key to my apartment. There's a lockbox somewhere and he has access to that. So it's not totally weird that he would possibly show up and get in and call my name in some sort of distress, I guess. But it still ticked me off right away, so I yelled back to the front door, "What?" And I asked, "Why didn't you call before you stormed over?" I was mad. Usually, you have to call someone before you come over like that. And I couldn't imagine what his problem was. He sounded like he was really in distress. So I quickly go to the door. And to my surprise, there was no one there. I checked the hallway outside the door, and it was empty. No one there. And that's just one example of these voices. And here's the thing, though. Before you say these two are hallucinations, I'm going to tell you they're not. I'm not the only one hearing them. There were times when my dog went berserk and barked whenever he heard the voices when he was with me. And he would just go crazy like someone was at the door or someone was there. And he absolutely heard the voice as clear as day, too. Once even, I was talking to someone at my door, and a voice called from inside the apartment. And this person who I was speaking with said, "Oh, do you have a friend over?" No, I do not have a friend over. It freaked me out a little bit, so I checked the apartment. No one there again. So these aren't hallucinations if others are hearing these voices too. But I can't explain it for the life of me. I never hear my neighbors. I'm on the top floor of a secure building with the windows shuttered. There's no electronics on when this is happening. Doesn't sound like a television or a radio. And for the life of me, I cannot find a logical explanation as to what is causing these voices to call my name. It'd be one thing if they were two just voices saying gibberish, but it's not. They specifically call my name. So, with that said, I, of course, Googled it like a ditz and found hearing voices is common for people who are passing away. But in every case I saw, and every reference to that happening, they were all cited as hallucinations. And since these aren't clearly hallucinations, I still cannot explain the voices. It is the weirdest thing I've probably ever experienced. And I'm completely stumped. And there are actually other events more distant in my life, going back approximately 2 decades, that are also something that I wish to discuss relative to the topic of, I don't know, a potential afterlife. Because I can't figure out what those voices could also be. They frankly sound like someone trying to contact me from an afterlife. And as bonkers as it sounds, that's literally the only conclusion I can come to. But that's not the strangest thing that's happened to me. And I'll touch on that here in a little bit. The reason, again, why I want to touch on this is because recently I spoke to one of my hospice social workers about this topic, about the afterlife. And she seemed genuinely afraid of it. But she, like me, is a recovering Catholic. We actually both went to the same Catholic school as kids, so what a small world. So it could be part of that old Catholic guilt rising up and that old fear rising up of hell and brimstone and forever damnation that's driving her to have such a fear of the afterlife. Whereas I've never believed in any of that. I've never been afraid of it. I've never even really acknowledged the concept of hell, frankly, nor have I acknowledged the concept really of heaven. But when I consider this topic, again, I must confess I did have one other strange experience years and years ago, 20 years ago or so. And I'm sure sharing this will push the boundaries with all listeners and everyone. But I do want to share it, because if I don't, there's not going to be any record of this ever happening to me. And I just want, frankly, to make a record of what happened. So that being said, here's the story of what actually happened to me 20 years ago. I have two friends. Their names are Chris and Aaron. And they were actually a couple. And they were visiting me at home at my old townhouse where I used to live, again, 20 or so years ago. And their visits were almost always benign and pretty normal. We would play games sometimes. We would eat, we would drink, we would talk, we would watch things on YouTube, we would laugh. Nothing, of course, really too surprising that some 20-something-year-old friends might do. Except this night, when they visited, these two particular friends, that is. Chris apparently has some experience, he said, in doing actual past life regressions through hypnosis. And me, being the insufferable combative person that I am, said, "Oh, I think that's hokey. Come on, give me a past life regression right now. Do it. If this is real, do it." I kind of threatened him. He actually agreed. He's like, "Okay, I'll try to hypnotize you, and we'll take it from there." I'm like, "Oh, great. Yeah, let's do it. I want to see if this is real." I really expected this was just going to be egg on his face. And at first it was. I laid down. He tried to hypnotize me. And he would come to a point in the beginning of the hypnosis where he would say, "And now how do you feel?" And I would just burst out laughing on my sofa, saying, "I feel ridiculous." So it took him, honestly, several attempts of doing this before I could finally just stop laughing and just try to take this a little bit more seriously. So eventually I sort of do. And he manages to get past a point where he actually feels that I'm under hypnosis. And I don't know if you've ever been under hypnosis before, my listeners, but it's an unusual experience. This was the first time it actually ever worked on me. I've had therapists try to do it in the past. I've actually had counselors do it since then, since this event, and it has worked on me. And it's an unusual feeling. I'm aware and lucid of my environment, but there's almost like a separate level of consciousness of things that I can think of and see and hear in my head, including memories that I would otherwise not recall and things that I otherwise would not be able to see or hear inside my head. So it's an unusual experience, and I think, well, obviously that's the intent of the hypnosis, is to gain access to that subconsciousness. So after numerous attempts, me giggling like a schoolgirl, it finally worked to some extent. And then he said something rather profound, because he was able to move on, as he was able to count back with me and to put me into a deeper hypnosis. And when he finished the count, He said, and now there's just darkness. And when he said that, sitting on the couch opposite of me with my other friend, Aaron, who was just watching, all of the lights in my home at that moment went out. There were multiple lights on. There was the kitchen light. There was the staircase light near the foyer. There were lights on in the living room where we were. I'm pretty sure there were lights on upstairs. When he said there was darkness, every single light in the house went out. And it wasn't a power failure. You could still hear the fridge humming from the kitchen. I could still see the dim green light of the oven clock through the kitchen door if I squinted through my eyes. And again, I was aware of my environment, but I decided to stay on the sofa, although I was startled that the lights did go out. And again, not a power failure. And he couldn't have pulled a trick like that. He would have had to turn off multiple lights on me at the exact same time without leaving the sofa. Or Aaron would have to do the same, my other friend who was just watching. Neither of them left the sofa. So, it was pretty startling, to say the least. But he moved on, and I recalled unusual things. I'll try to cut to the end of it, but in the end, I said my favorite food was something that, when I described it, sounded like a fig. Whereas in my life now, up to that point at least, I had never had a fig. But I described that my favorite food was basically a fig. I gave a perfect explanation of it. And I said I work outside a lot. It's dusty, there's a lot of sunlight, and I work in a lot of trees. There's a lot of trees and vines where I work. Like like an orchard. And then I said I could see a girl calling to me, and I think she's calling my name. Because Chris, who was trying to drive the hypnosis session, was trying to see if I can get my name. And it was dark to me. I couldn't think of anything. But I could see this girl waving to me in my head, like a memory. Some dark-haired girl, some brunette with long hair, smiling, waving to me. Again, this was outside. I could see the sun hitting her face as she walked up to me, waving, and called my name. And what she called me was Nimoi. Nimoi was what she was saying. I said, oh my God, is my name Nimoi? And just maybe a minute or two later, it clicked in my head. I said out loud, oh, I do know my name now. It just hit me. And I said, it is Niemus Praetor. So, that was supposedly my name. Then, after some time and a few other reveals, I won't get into them all here, my friend took me out of the regression, out of the hypnosis, and pulled me back. And the first thing he asked, in his skeptic way, he said, were you just pretending to be an ancient Roman? Were you faking that? Because even then, 20 years ago, I had an affinity for Roman history. And I said, no, these were literally the things I heard and saw in my head, like old memories. And he just kind of went, huh. And I even asked him, how did you do the light trick? Because because I knew the lights went off. Again, you're aware of your surroundings when you're still under hypnosis. At least I am. And he says, I don't know. He says, that kind of scared me when it happened, but I figured I must be doing something right, so I might as well continue, is what he said. Those were his exact words. So we laughed. And shortly after my friends left the house, I decided to get my Latin to English dictionary out that I had in my office and looked up the word Nemus, or the name, to see if there's anything in there. And it came back as an olive plantation, or a word used to describe an olive plantation. And of course, praetor, I already know that is just basically means captain. And the Nemoe was just basically calling me a shortened version of the Nemus, like a nickname, a friendly nickname. And that's when it hit me. What I said I was doing was I was the captain of a plantation. And that's how I identified myself, of an olive plantation. Eagerly, I picked up my phone and called my friends as they were driving home. And I told them what I had found in my book. And they just busted out laughing because they were just so amazed. They were just in hysterics, because all that they could do was laugh at something like that. Me too, at the time. All I could do was laugh at that. And to this day, I'm not sure what all that was. And in a lot of ways, I can easily dismiss the Roman theme and the Latin. Just me being a Roman history buff, I could have easily remembered things subconsciously and somehow retold it. I even read I read plenty of Roman literature even, so I could have echoed something that I saw in my head from reading a literary piece. It could be that simple. But I can't explain with all the lights going dark at once. When we were done with this whole experiment, of course, afterwards, the lights turned on just fine, one by one. There wasn't a fuse that was triggered. There was nothing like that. They just all went off. And I can't explain that at all, again, to this very day. And it was an experience that ever since has haunted me. And I still wonder, was that really evidence of a past life? As crazy it sounds, I have to wonder. Now, before I continue on with the next segment of this podcast, I do want to provide a little PSA here in saying that no cats were hurt in the memory retold here within this podcast. And further, I copied this segment of this podcast that discusses this past life regression and shared it with the witness on hand at the scene when the event occurred. And he did agree that my retelling of this story was spot on and exactly as how he remembered it as well. So as I come to the end of this podcast, I know it's somewhat short, but I want to kind of sum things up with a question that I don't know the answer to. And that is, why do I mention this stuff now? Why do I get into such odd topics? The short answer is I really don't know. And of course, I'm not discussing the health update. That's something that's real and is indisputable and is an appropriate update of the physical state of my body as I go through this decline. But obviously with the other topic of, well, I should say the other two topics of voices and the past life regression that happened so long ago, I'm not sure why I bring those up now. The voices are relatively new. I mean, they happen or have happened only within the last couple of weeks, honestly. So they actually are quite new, in fact. And I'm still very skeptical of any afterlife. I think there's got to be an explanation of that sort of activity, but I just can't think of it. I usually rely on good old Occam for cases like this, but I can't think of a simple or less complex explanation, and just have to go with, I really don't know what that is. I don't know what the explanation is of either those voices or that past life regression attempt that I went through some 20 years ago. I hope I don't lose my atheist points here, but don't worry. I'm still a big fan of the Four Horsemen, especially Hitchens, and I'm not running around with an Ouija board or calling psychics or other such paranormal enthusiasts over to my house. There's nothing like that. I did feel, though, I had to share not just the health update, but these experiences, the recent ones, and how they also made me think of that past experience. And the reason being for that simply is I just wanted there to be a record of that, of both experiences. And honestly, the podcast, my voice out there, was the best way to make a record of those experiences. Because I know that otherwise, when I pass away, these experiences too will just pass with me, and no one will have ever known that they indeed happened to me. I'll be sure to provide any updates if the voices continue or if there's any change, or if I do come across a good explanation. I sure would love one. But again, for right now, with both experiences, I have to revert back to, I just don't know. And with all that said, I come here to the end of this podcast, and I want to thank each and every one of you deeply for listening to my little podcast. It really does help for me to share these experiences with the world, actually, and to know that there are listeners out there willing to hear my voice. It can really help to buck me up as I face my own decline. Don't forget to click on follow to follow the podcast and turn on notifications to make sure you're notified of future podcasts. If you really want to help support the podcast even further, you're more than welcome to go to patreon.com/mydogwilleatmyface. Again, patreon.com/mydogwilleatmyface. But most of all, again, the best support I could ever ask for is from you listeners to just lend me your ears and to listen to these feelings and these experiences that I share. They do mean the world to me. And as I said, it really helps as I go through this process. So with that, I will now say I will talk to you next time, and auf Wiedersehen.